everybody, welcome to number 27. I'm Jack. Now I have driven a number of modified MX5s. Amongst them was a supercharged Mk1 and a Mk2 with the Jag V6 engine. I love both of those. Now this is a Mk3, also known as the NC. It is the least loved of all the MX5s. This one though is tuned by BBR and it is probably the most faithful representation of a tuned MX5 that retains the original spirit out of all of them. Could it actually be the best one? Right, so first thing is turn off the traction control, which even there, just taking off a bit smartly, I could see it cutting in and out. Now, I said earlier that this is the least loved of the MX5s, and the reason for that is that it's considered to be a bit bloated and a little bit heavy. Now let's put that into context. The original MX5, the Mk1, supposed to weigh anything between 950 and 1,000 kilos, depending on where you look. I think it's closer to 1,000, but anyway. The Mk2 or NB was a little bit heavier still already than that. I don't know if it was sort of 30 kilos heavier. This one is over 100 kilos because with the fabric roof, it weighs 1,140. Or with the retractable hardtop like this one, it's another 40 kilos, so 180. You know, you're starting to put quite a bit more weight on. The thing though is it's not all bad news because unlike the other two cars, this feels quite well resolved inside. It doesn't feel like a cheap car. It feels like a, it feels like a much more grown-up version than either of those. It feels like something you don't have to apologize for. The interior, some of the plastics feel a little bit cheap, but it feels very well put together. It feels very solid, and it looks much nicer. It looks like a real car, let's say. And another great thing is that this was the first version that introduced multi-link rear suspension. So there were some definite improvements. I think the problem is, I've driven one of these before, it was quite a while ago. It wasn't a bad car by any means. It was a really good car, but it just felt a little bit too soft, a little bit too friendly, and like it had lost some of the magic that the original cars had. The Mk2 is essentially a Mk1, which is just a little bit uglier, but it drives almost as well. I think there isn't really that much in it. It still has that magic of that lightweight and flattering the driver. When it came to this, the weight went up quite a lot. It became too civilized, I think, and it lost some of that MX5 sparkle, some of the magic. There's also the looks. The Mk1 was an incredibly pretty car. Still is, I think, one of the all-time best. The one that came after, really, they had to get rid of the pop-up headlights, but again, it looked, I don't think the Mk2s, they're not particularly good-looking cars. This came out, and I think on the whole, I like the way they look, but I know there's some people who hate them. That again, it has that sort of wider look, which ties in with this feeling that they're just heavier, they're bloated, they've lost the magic of the MX5. Well, this one, with the BBR kit, let me just sort out turning around at this junction, and then I'll tell you more about the BBR kit, what it involves, and how much it costs. Let's just spin it around here. Okay, so the BBR kit, as standard, these are 160 horsepower or thereabouts. Weighing 1,150 kilos, that's not going to make for a super quick car. Now, speed was never what the Mazda was about, but most of them had enough power to make it controllable, to make it part of the driving experience, so that in the bends you were adjusting with the throttle And I think on a standard one of these, with the softer suspension as well, that's not the case. The BBR kit, the base kit is to do with the engine. The BBR, the Super 200 as it's called, I think there's also a Super 180, but the 200 I think is the one worth going for and is in this car. Brings it up to just over 200 horsepower, and that is different cams, different intake, different exhaust manifold, and different exhaust system. It just sharpens up the whole engine, makes it sound better, and gives it much more of an edgy feeling, as we're going to see. The cost is about £2,800, I think, all in and fitted now, which I think is fairly good value. There is also an option for a turbocharged setup, but that really does change the character of the way the MX5 feels. I'm not against it. The supercharged car that I drove and the V6 engined one, they were brilliant in their own ways, but I think this is more faithful to the original recipe. The question is it good enough? Does it turn this into something that is more grown up, easier to live with day by day, but still has that beautiful feeling of the original cars? I'm going to find out in a minute. Just one more thing to say about this. This also has coilovers, Mazda R's. So the chassis is a little bit better tied down as well. Let's try and overtake this chap so that we can do some proper driving. I think there should be some room here. I would have struggled to do that in the original car, but this, the engine just feels like it has much more purpose. It's already putting a smile on my face. Wow. Even from that little short bit of road, I can tell you that this has really transformed the way that this car feels. Now, the reason why this is a BBR and it has the Mazda shocks and some sort of track pads is that Spencer, who brought it down, wanted something to use on track, and it's an interesting car to be used as a track car because we were talking about it earlier, and for most track days now, insurance is a bit of a waste of money because the excess is so high you end up not claiming. So you want something that you can go on track with without insuring, that isn't too expensive to run but still retains some of that fun. Definite improvement over the normal car. A massive improvement, I would say. So brakes are strong thanks to those pads. The discs aren't any bigger. The steering front end isn't quite as, I think, doesn't communicate quite as much as on the earlier cars. And even though this is so much better tied down, you can feel the extra weight when you're driving it hard. You can just feel the mass transfer going round the corners much more than you would in an early car. It's not as effortless. And as is tradition, let's just take it through the gears. It is so much more complete as a sports car than a standard one would be. I think it actually does turn it into a sports car, and I'm not sure if I would call a standard NC a real sports car. It's just so soft, and it's a little bit underpowered. With this, I have to be honest, I think it could do with a little bit more on top, but this conversion really does maintain that essential character that an MX5 should have. You're still working it. It's not, you know, it's not effortless power. It's a car that you really have to take up to the top of the gears to get the best performance. It feels a little bit more muscular across the rev range, and I think that torque with this conversion has also been lowered by 1,000 revs. So it is even torquier than the standard car, but I think because there's more power up top and it pulls with more urgency, that extra torque is kind of lost in comparison when you're driving it. Thankfully, the gear change is good, but again, it is one area where it doesn't quite measure up to the early cars. There's an immediacy and a connection that isn't there. This is brilliant by most standards, but it's not quite as good as from the early cars. There is another option if you're looking at modifying your NC, and that is the turbo kit that BBR produced. Now, because it's done by BBR, I am sure that it will be really very well produced and engineered. But I think the problem with that is, well, it's not a problem necessarily, but that's going to be a very different experience to the traditional MX5 experience with the way that a turbo delivers power and torque. It's just going to make for a different car. The other downside is, although you get quite a bit more power, which I think would be welcome, you get up to 260 horsepower with that. The stage 1 turbo is 260 horsepower. The stage 2 goes close to 300. But even for a stage 1, you're looking at spending about £4,500. So that's more than double of this conversion, which sticks a bit more faithfully to the original ethos of the MX5. Although a very good car for many people, I can see the criticism for the NC where it comes from. I think it's just too rounded. It was made to appeal too much to a wider set of people. Rather, it strayed a little bit from the original recipe of what made the MX5 so good. And the question is, does this BBR kit bring it back to where it was? And the answer is no. Now, I'm not saying that in a negative manner. I'm not saying that this is a bad kit or that I don't like it. I think it makes it feel like it should. It makes it feel like a sports car again. But does it make it feel like a Mk1 MX5? It doesn't. It doesn't quite have still that joie de vivre. It doesn't have that sense of fun that those early cars had. It's not quite as approachable. The limits are still much higher. It is great, but it's just great in a different way. I think it's a car that in some ways just takes a little bit longer to appreciate, even with these mods. The earlier cars, it's just quicker to get in sync with them. I think that this just has a bit more depth and requires a little bit more work to get the best from. I have to have a bit of a disclaimer here, and obviously when Spencer was looking for this car, he also said he'd rather have had the soft top because, you know, it's about 40 kilos that you're saving, and that is, you know, it's fairly high up in the car there. I think that does also make a little bit of a difference. But the thing is, when you're looking for a car like this and you want the BBR tuned one, if a car comes up, you have to get it. I would be interested to try one which doesn't have that and see if it gives it a little bit more of that live feeling that I'm craving, that I think is still missing on this, despite the shocks and everything else. And now, shocks currently are set up. So they're set up for, you know, at their softer setting to be good on the road. Stiffened up, I'm sure it would get some more tightness and that extra feeling of weight, because you'd feel the weight transfer less. But I think as it is just about right for a British B road. So I'm not sure that just stiffening up would be the right thing for everyday use. Thank you so much to Spencer for bringing this down. If you want to see a couple of other possibilities of modifying MX-5s, have a look at this. There's two very different approaches there, but both have their charms. Thank you so much, and see you for the next video.